All right, welcome back to the podcast. I'll get right to it, covering some nautical news. It's not just nautical news, it's the headlines everywhere. It's the tariffs. I'm going to talk about the latest trends rocking the boating world. We'll explore how U.S. tariffs combined with choppy global economic waters are impacting yacht production, sales, and imports. This is especially relevant if you love sailboats, like many of us, but we also touch on motor yachts for a full picture. Grab a coffee, let's cast off the dock lines and get moving. So first off, tariffs, how they're hitting your favorite brands like Beneteau or Lagoon, or even maybe like an Ocean Alexander in the motor yacht world. How U.S. buyers are reacting. Many are eyeing local boats or used boats, and how European and Asian yacht makers are responding to that. A quick look at motor yachts versus sailboats in this scenario and the global ripple effects on prices, production lead times, and competition. So first off, the new versus the old rules. And I'm sorry, this is a very fluid, and think the tariffs are changing by the day, if not the hour, and you never know. By the time I post this, it might be out of date somewhat, but at least you'll get the big picture. So let's clarify what's changed currently. Up until recently, importing a yacht into the U.S. was not a big deal tax-wise. The import duty on a boat coming into the United States was only 1.5% of the boat's value for most sailboats and powerboats. So in other words, if you had a $500,000 yacht, you'd pay only $7,500 import duty, which is a relatively small line item. It's not nothing, but it's not going to stop you from importing the boat. Now, you do have some other taxes on top of that. So if you want to bring it into Florida, say, I don't recall offhand, I think it's a 6% sales tax. So then you would have to pay that sales tax in the U.S. Or that state. I think actually Florida has a limit of like $16,000. But there are states that don't have sales tax, so you can bring a boat in, like say Delaware. You have to have a corporation in Delaware, which is not hard to set up. But then you can bring in that boat registered in Delaware for, I believe it's a flat fee. It's not much. It's $500 compared to, I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it's not a percentage-wise. It's a very small amount compared to a $500,000 boat. But you only pay the 1.5%. Federal duty. But now the game has changed drastically. In early 2025, the U.S. government announced sweeping new tariffs on imports, and boats got caught in the net. So right now, there's a universal 10% tariff on all imported goods, including yachts, and even higher rates for certain countries of origin. So here's a breakdown of these country-specific increases compared to the old 1.5% duty. Now keep in mind, it's a bit fluid, so European-built boats is a 20% tariff, but Trump has lowered except for certain countries like China, has lowered that to 10% across the board. So some of these numbers but that's only for 90 days, so who knows if that'll actually happen. So when I say what the tariffs are, keep in mind that the tariffs are currently 10% for most countries, but when I talk about the rates that these countries have, that'll be at the end of that 90 days, which is, I don't know, it's been 10 days or something, I'm not sure. But so European-built boats have a 20% tariff versus the old 1.5. So the EU got targeted with a higher rate than, say, England. So if you're eyeing a Beneteau or Lagoon from France or an Italian-made Azimut, you're looking at roughly 1/5 of the boat's price added as a tax now. Taiwan-built boats, roughly 32% tariff. This is huge for popular Taiwanese brands like Ocean Alexander and Horizon, which U.S. buyers love. And we'll talk more about them soon. China-built yachts, staggering, who knows what it is right now, honestly, I have no idea. It's like over 100%, 120, 140, I don't know what it is because it's changed so many times. But you're talking, so if you buy $1 million boat, now you got to pay over $2 million for that boat if it's China. So there's certain manufacturers there, like I believe, I can't remember who all, I think Aquila is built in China, and there's a few others, I'm not sure. But, so those boats are going to have a hard time. Basically, so a boat made in China is double. All other countries is a 10% base rate, includes the UK and Australia, and which is a big bump from the 1.5% they were before. So to put that in perspective, in the old system, a $1 million yacht would incur about a $15,000 import duty. Under the current new system, that same yacht can have anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 to $320,000 in Taiwan. And if it's in China, look at it. I mean, you're not another $1 million. So these are enormous increases over the previously norm. No wonder the industry is reeling. Now, there is ways around that. So say you wanted to as an American, you wanted to buy a boat built in, say, a Lagoon 450. So that's, I don't know, it's about $1 million for one of those brand new. or say an Island Spirit built in Thailand. There's 1.2, 1.3 million for an Island Spirit 52. Now then, if you bring it into the U.S., you can register it in another country. So say you want to register it in the British Virgin Islands. They have a program there that's pretty easy to do. I don't even think the boat ever has to go to the BVI. And in fact, under their program, I don't think you can bring it to the BVI without incurring some more import duties to there. But you can register the boat in the BVI, and you get registration that's good worldwide, and then you can sail it around the world wherever you'd like. Now, that caveat to that would be is if you bring the boat to the United States, you have a limited amount of time that the boat is allowed to be basically in each state and the country without importing it, and then you have to pay the sales tax for whatever state you're in. So, I'm not sure what the offhand what it is, but I believe it's 90 days. So you can bring your boat into the U.S. for 90 days, but then it has to leave. But if you're going to keep a boat, if you're just going to be out cruising full time, then that's not a big deal to you because you're not going to spend much time in the U.S. anyway. Or say you want to put it in charter in the Caribbean, no big deal there either because the boat's never going to go to the U.S. So you might be thinking, is this for real? Is this permanent? So in July 2025, the 90 days expires and everybody's rates kick back up to whatever it is, 20% for Europe, 32% for Taiwan. I think it's still remaining over 100% for China. It's up in the air, and that's making complications throughout the boating industry. So let's talk about the impact on the folks who actually ultimately pay the price, literally the buyers. So there's a big sticker shock for U.S. buyers, especially for those who had their heart set on a popular imported brand. These tariffs are a big punch in the wallet. Beneteau sailboats, Lagoon catamarans, these are all French built and now facing a 20% import duty instead of 1.5%. Ocean Alexander, luxury motor yacht built in Taiwan, faces a 32% instead of 1.5%. And so if you got a brand new Beneteau Oceanus, say a smaller one, $300,000, you would jump from paying $4,500, the old duty, to $60,000. That's a big increase. That's enough to buy, a lot of gear and a brand new tender and whatever you want. For the larger Lagoon 46, the value at around $1 million, you're going to pay anywhere from, you would be paying $15,000 to now you're going to pay $200,000. And that could be the difference between getting a new boat or settling for something else. And take a brand new Ocean Alexander out of Taiwan, often around $3 million or more. Now, you used to pay $45,000 duty import. For $3 million, that's not a whole lot. Now you're talking almost $1 million in tariffs. 32%, it's $960,000. Combine all that with all the softening economy, and you can see why the buyers are saying maybe not now. Now then, that's at current prices. A friend of mine, Sam Lyles, wrote a good blog. I'll link to it down below. So these are the current prices, but you got to imagine all the knock-on effects of the tariffs. Like, say a lot of the parts for that boat are built in America. And so then they've got to be shipped around, or you got to ship all these parts in. So the prices of these boats are going to go up anyway, just because the builders are going to incur more cost. And we're not just talking the tariffs. Like the builders are going to incur more cost because of all these tariffs too. So they're going to pass that along to the buyer. And he goes into great detail on that. I'm not going to touch on that too much. I'm just going to talk about the tariffs and how they're affecting the current boats out there, not like the ones being built. But I will get into how the boats are being built and how that's going to have a knock-on effect down the line. So some buyers have temporarily put their purchases on hold to see how this all shakes out. It's a classic wait and see, hoping the tariffs get reversed or reduced in negotiations. So if you were planning on bringing a boat over in the next month or two, you might be holding off to see where these tariffs go, to see if they go back to normal. So maybe a lot of these buyers are canceling orders or whatever, or delaying them at least. No one wants to be the person who paid a huge tariff if there's a chance it all goes away in a few months. So beyond pausing, buyers are changing their game plans. One big shift is looking at domestic boats or brokerage, used boats, instead of ordering new from abroad. Why? Because U.S. built boats aren't subject to these tariffs at all. But like I said before, a lot of the components for these boats that are built in the U.S. are made in Taiwan, made in Europe. Because a lot of the manufacturing for these companies, a lot of that component. So then you're going to pay the import duties on that. So it's going to raise the price of the boat, even if it is a U.S. built boat. The whole price is going to go up no matter what. And if So there are no catamarans built in the United States, but say you have a Catalina. You're comparing a Catalina to a Beneteau, the same variety. Well, Benetou's just got 20% more expensive. So Catalina, even though their boats are they're not subject to that 20% import duty, they're going to raise their prices to match, because why not? You have no option to pay it. So that's another issue. You're just going to see prices rise all across the board. We're seeing a lot of people say maybe they'll look at a pre-owned or an American-built boat rather than pay the tariff on a new premium foreign yacht. So often when you purchase a boat in America, or the one that's here, it'll say duty paid on the listing, so that you know that the duty has been paid in America, so there's no import tax. This typically applies to boats that are already imported before the tariff change, often slightly used or dealer demo boats on U.S. soil. Those just became a lot more attractive. Like I mentioned before, we're also seeing buyers consider loopholes like foreign flagging and keeping their boats outside the U.S. So, for instance, an American might purchase a Lagoon catamaran and keep it in the Bahamas or the Virgin Islands, operating it under a foreign flag to avoid import duties into the U.S., thus avoiding the duty. And like I said before, it's a strategy that a lot of charter operators use. Like if you go down to a boat that's even, basically, if you charter a boat in the United States, in the Bahamas, or in the Virgin Islands or whatever, very few of them, almost none of them, are actually registered in the United States, because then you'd have to pay the duty and the taxes on that, and those boats aren't going to be in the U.S., so why would you pay the duty and the tax on that? So an interesting behavior shift is a pivot to made in America, USA boats. U.S. manufacturers might be the unexpected winners here. Brands built in America, think like Catalina Yachts, Hatteras, Viking, Tiara, Scout for power boats, others. Are now having a price edge from anywhere from 10 to 50% against their foreign competitors. Like I said, they're probably going to raise their price, though, because they can. If the other boats are more expensive, they're just going to raise their prices, because why not take advantage of that while you can? So as a result, dealers for American brands are gearing up for increased demand. We could see a renaissance of sorts of the U.S. boat builders. They've been slowly going away. There's very few builders in the United States anymore. There's no catamaran builders. I'm sorry, there might be some boutique-y stuff that I don't know about, but no major manufacturers of catamarans are built in there's no major manufacturers of catamarans built in the U.S. And most of the sailboats built in the U.S. are under 50 feet. I don't even know. Catalina would be one of the few sailboats that I can recall offhand that's still under manufacture. I think it's built in Florida. I think it is built in Florida now. It used to be on the West Coast. They moved it to Florida a while back. But not every segment of boats has a U.S. made equivalent. We'll touch on that later, but the used boat market and the domestic new boat market are definitely where the U.S. buyers are shifting their attention. We've essentially gone from an open global shopping spree to something of a buy American or buy used moment out of necessity. Interestingly, if people chase a limited supply of used boats, guess what? The used boat prices will rise too. Supply and demand. Some brokers are already hinting that the late model used Lagoon or Beneteau yachts, which were a bargain a few years ago, or a year ago anyway, are now in high demand since the new ones got pricier. Current owners of these boats might actually benefit with higher resale values, a small silver lining for them, but not for the rest of us. And before we move on from all this is happening against a backdrop of a cooling economy. It's not just tariffs in isolation. The global economic conditions play a big role. Higher interest rates over the past few years have made financing a boat loan more expensive. We saw boat dealers trimming their inventories in 2024 as sales slowed down. In fact, Group Beneteau, the company behind Beneteau, Lagoon, Jeanneau, etc., reported revenues down about 29% in 2024 and a 60% drop in operating profit, largely because dealers ordered fewer boats. They were cautious due to the interest rates and a glut of inventory. Marketing was already a bit soft coming into 2025. Now adding tariffs, making boats 20 to 30% or more expensive overnight, it's a double whammy for demand by U.S. buyers who were on the fence, might even be more hesitant now, especially if financing costs are up and so are prices. It's important to keep in mind that tariffs are hitting at a time when pandemic-fueled boating boom has cooled off. Manufacturers were just starting to feel the pinch of that cool down. It's like hitting the industry when it's already down. Next, let's talk about the other side of the coin. How are these manufacturers, especially those overseas, responding to keep their business afloat and keep selling to the U.S.? But first, if you're enjoying this discussion and want to stay up to date on all things sailing and boating, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. and maybe give the video a nice thumbs up as well. I'd really appreciate it. And if you're finding this on YouTube, it is also on wherever you get your audio podcast, Apple and Spotify, all of that. Or if you're finding it on Spotify and Apple, you can watch the video on YouTube, the Sailing Doodles Podcast. All right, back to the news. It's not just buyers feeling the heat. The yacht builders, especially in Europe and Asia, are scrambling to respond to this new reality. Many of these companies rely heavily on U.S. sales, so losing American buyers to tariffs is a big deal. Let's break it down by region. Europe, think France, Italy, Germany. European yacht makers have long enjoyed a strong U.S. market. Think brands like Beneteau, Jeanneau, Lagoon, Ferretti, Riva, Pershing, Azimut, San Lorenzo, Bavaria, Hanse, and so on. The U.S. is often their second biggest or even biggest market outside of Europe. Now they're facing up to a 20% cost that increase to the U.S. customers. That threatens to price their boats out of reach for some buyers, or at least make the buyers think twice. And how are they responding? Caution and lobbying. Firstly, a lot of these companies are lobbying through industry groups to get these tariffs reversed or softened. They're in talks with trade officials trying to make the case that pleasure boats shouldn't be caught in a trade war. Recall, these tariffs weren't specifically aimed at boats. They're part of a larger trade dispute, but boats became collateral damage. In the meantime, uncertainty is the name of the game. For example, Beneteau's CEO recently declined to give a profit forecast for the year because of the uncertainty of the U.S. trade policy, saying things could go one way or another at any time. They just don't know what will happen, so they're holding off predictions, and that's pretty telling. Normally, these big firms like to reassure investors with solid guidance, but not this time. And shifting production. Some European manufacturers fortunately have a foothold in the U.S. already. Beneteau is a great example. They actually own several American boat brands, like Group Beneteau, so it'd be Four Winds, Wellcraft, and others. They have manufacturing in Cadillac, Michigan, and Marion, South Carolina. These are the smaller boats, think like ski boats and lake boats. The Beneteau CEO hinted that if the very significant tariffs hit the smaller boats they build in Europe, they could lean more on their U.S. factories to adapt. In plainer terms, if tariffs make it too expensive to import a 30-foot Beneteau from France, maybe Beneteau will build that 30-foot boat in the USA instead. This kind of reshoring or local production is a logical response to avoid tariffs. It's not instant. You can't just build a new factory overnight. But companies with existing U.S. facilities are dusting off plans to expand them. We might see more European brands invest more in American production if these trade barriers stick around. In the long run, that could even create more jobs in the U.S. boat building. But it's a tough call. Do they invest millions to shift production, or do they wait and hope the political winds change in a year? A lot of them are hedging their bets, maybe preparing plans but not pulling the trigger unless they have to. So incentives and pricing adjustment. We can also expect foreign builders, European in this case, to consider discounts or incentives to keep all U.S. buyers interested. For instance, a dealer of a European yacht brand might offer a special tariff relief discount, essentially eating part of the cost themselves to close a sale. They might also prioritize the U.S. orders they do have to deliver those boats faster before any tariff deadlines or to show goodwill. Speaking of speed, if a buyer signed a contract before the tariffs, but the boat delivers after the tariffs, some manufacturers are negotiating who eats that cost. It's a messy situation. Some contracts have clauses for duties and some don't. There are reports that a few manufacturers are quietly offering to split the tariff costs with dealers or customers for orders already in the pipeline, just to avoid cancellations. After all, a canceled sale is lost revenue entirely, whereas splitting the pain at least salvages the deal. We don't have exact quotes on these negotiations. Those happen behind closed doors, but it's the kind of maneuvering going on. Alternative markets. If selling to an American becomes harder, European boat builders will double down on other markets. They might try to sell more in their home market, Europe, or to Asia and Australia. But if the global economy is cooling, that's not so easy. Still, for example, an Italian yard might say, all right, we lost some U.S. orders, let's try to find a buyer in the Middle East for that build slot. Some markets, like the Middle East, are still quite strong for yacht sales in recent years, so there's a bit of shifting of focus. Now, talking Asia, that's like Taiwan, China, and Southeast Asia. Asian yacht manufacturers are also heavily impacted, in some cases even more so. Taiwan is huge in the yacht world for high-quality motor yachts like Ocean Alexander, Horizon, Grand Banks, actually Singapore, Taiwan. And Taiwan has a 32% tariff threat. China has been up and coming. They build a lot of components and some complete boats, including models for European or American brands and a few Chinese brands like Aquila Power Cats, for instance. And China faces a more than 100% brutal tariff. effectively shutting down Chinese-built yachts from the U.S. if it holds. So what are they doing about it? Taiwan's approach for manufacturers like Ocean Alexander Horizon have strong customer bases in the U.S. and are very concerned about losing those sales. They don't have factories in the U.S., so they can't shift production as easily as Beneteau might. Instead, they may consider intermediate steps, maybe finishing boats in a different country or labeling them differently. However, the tariff is based on country of origin of manufacturer, not brand nationality. So there's no easy escape. One possibility is routing through countries with trade agreements, for example, building hulls in Taiwan, but doing final assembly in, say, a country with a lower tariff rate. But the rules typically would still count where value is added. It gets complicated. Realistically, Taiwanese boat builders might have to absorb some of the cost or raise U.S. prices. They might temporarily slow down production if orders fail. There's talk in the industry that these companies are quietly hoping the political situation resolves before they have to make drastic moves. For Chinese yacht building, the U.S. market is relatively smaller. Europe and domestic China market are more their focus in some segments. But take, for example, Aquila Power Cats, a brand built in China but sold globally and popular in power cat charters. A 100% tariff could kill their U.S. sales. Chinese companies might pivot to other markets entirely, and the U.S. might just be written off for the moment. Alternatively, the Chinese boat builders might try to partner with Western brands that do OEM work that somehow circumvent these direct import duties, though not likely under these rules. Other parts of Asia and globally, not all Asian countries were hit with the high tariffs. For example, I don't even really call them Asian, but it's in that part of the world. Australia, but they don't build a whole lot, Maritimo yachts and others are at the base 10%, and Turkey is also at 10% despite being a big boat building hub. In fact, Turkey might even benefit from this. Turkish-built yachts like New Marine, Siren, and Vicom are known for good quality and value, and now they only have a 10% tariff compared to a 20% tariff for EU or higher for Taiwan. Industry watchers say Turkish shipyards could attract more American buyers as a result. Similarly, British builders, Sunseeker and Princess, are only at the 10% rate because the UK isn't part of the EU. This means that Asian and European manufacturers in higher tariff countries are watching their competitors in lower tariff countries poach potential sales. It's a realignment. If you can't beat the tariff, maybe you should join forces or shift your supply chain to a friendlier locale. We might witness some new partnerships, like an EU brand contracting with a Turkish shipyard to build a model, or a Taiwanese company setting up shop in, say, South Korea with a 25% tariff, or even the US itself down the line. One more response worth noting, American manufacturers with overseas plants are bringing some production back home. We touched on this with Beneteau, but also true for certain American brands. For instance, some U.S. brands have been building boats in China or Taiwan to save costs, because labor and production costs were much cheaper. Examples include certain sport fishing boats, trawlers, and smaller boats that were outsourced. Now with the tariff, those savings evaporate. According to the Yacht Industry News, American yacht brands that previously moved manufacturing offshore are now incentivized to bring production back to the U.S. soil to avoid tariffs. If they do that, that could mitigate the impact and also boost the U.S. boat building jobs. Companies like Outer Reef Yachts, an American brand building in Taiwan, or Nordhaven, a U.S. brand building in Taiwan and China, might seriously consider shifting more build work back to the United States, or at least non-tariff countries. It won't happen overnight, but these strategic moves are on the table. In short, European and Asian builders are in defensive mode, trying to wait out the storm, using any U.S. footprint or friendly country to their advantage, possibly offering deals and looking to other markets. Everyone's scenario planning like crazy. It's a fluid situation. One day it seems like tariffs will stick, the next day there's rumors of a trade talk or breakthrough. As of now, the builders are holding their breath. If the 90-day suspension we mentioned earlier leads to a resolution, you might see a collective sigh of relief. If not, expect more drastic measures by late summer, like price hikes, production cuts, or big shifts in manufacturing locations. So while the sailboat industry, there's very few sailboats built in the United States. I mean, I think Island Packet is still built in the U.S., I'm not sure. And then Catalina. And then maybe, some small little, dinghy sailors. But that's it for sailboats. Whereas the United States does have a decent amount of domestically built motor yachts. So think Viking or Hatteras. They have a 0% tariff because they're built in the USA. So if you were considering an Azimut or a Princess, maybe now you're going to switch to a Hatteras or a Viking. Or maybe, the Azimut versus the Princess. Well, the UK is only a 10% tariff, so you might still go with the Princess. Whereas the Azimut is Italian, and they're subject to the 10 or 20%. And then Hatteras might beat them both because they don't have to pay it at all. But like I said, you know, a lot of the components for Hatteras and Vikings and all that come from Europe or Asia. And so they still have to import those. And I'm sure a lot of those companies have already stockpiled stuff because they knew the tariffs were coming, so order as much, but to beat the tariffs. But, you know, they're going to raise their prices eventually too. And they can raise their prices also because if an Azimuth just went up 20%, a comparable Hatteras, they might as well raise their price too because you have no option. Or maybe they could just keep more sales because they can sell them for cheaper. All right, so now let's broaden our view and talk about the big picture of global effects. How do these tariffs and current economic conditions ripple through the worldwide yacht market? When a major market like the US catches cold, the rest of the world can feel it sneeze. At least that's in the boating industry. Over the last few years, production lead times for new yachts were pretty long because demand was high and supply chains were stretched. For instance, some catamaran builders had a 2-year backlog at the height of the pandemic boating boom. Now with demand cooling off and tariffs adding uncertainty, we might see order cancellations or a slowdown in new orders from US clients. If that happens, those boat builders, especially in Europe and Asia, could experience shrinking backlogs. In short, a builder might keep their workers busy to finish out existing orders, but if new orders don't replace them, they'll eventually cut production. That could mean by late 2025 this year or next year, the wait times for certain yachts may actually shrink because the queue is shorter. But it means if you want one and you're willing to pay, you could get it sooner. On the flip side, some boat builders might intentionally delay or defer production of models destined for the United States, hoping conditions improve. A U.S. buyer's order might get less priority, effectively increasing lead time for Americans. There's also a scenario where if a builder relocates or adjusts production to avoid tariffs, that transition could temporarily disrupt schedules. You know, so if they have to build a new factory, like you said before, you can't just do that overnight. It takes months, if not years, to build a new factory and then train all the people in the new country. And then companies going to want to do that because then at the uncertain times, because if all this tariff stuff just goes away in 6 months, well, they just spent millions of dollars relocating their factory or building a factory in the United States or a tariff-friendly country where maybe labor is not as cheap. So their costs, not only to build that, plus their cost of production have gone up. And then if the tariffs go away in 6 months, they just wasted a lot of money, and they're probably not going to follow through with that. So it's with all the uncertainty, that's a problem. All told, lead times will be closely tied to how demand holds up. A cooling global economy with higher interest rates is already taking pressure off those long wait lists. Some normalization was happening. Tariffs might accelerate that. Whereas it was a 2-year wait before, maybe it's only a year or less now for some of these boats. Everyone is waiting and watching to see who gains and who loses in the U.S. market. And like I've touched on this before, but it's a global supply chain for the marine industry. Engines might come from the US or Europe, electronics might come from Japan, hardware from Asia. Tariffs on these very components like Chinese marine electronics or Italian furniture or whatnot can raise the cost for boat builders no matter where they are. Some European yacht makers rely on American engines, think Caterpillar, Cummins. If the EU retaliates with its own tariffs, which it has, that could raise the cost of boats in Europe. In 2018 and 19, the EU actually imposed a 25% tariff on US-built boats in retaliation for the US steel tariffs, which hurt US boat exports to Europe significantly. So as the EU hits back, it could mean the European dealers might hesitate to import American boats, which could hurt the American boat builders market. US boat exports to Europe aren't huge compared to the other way around, but it's still a factor, particularly for some fishing boats and smaller craft. So the trade war is dynamic and could escalate. Everyone could end up paying more if this spirals, truly a lose-lose. An interesting side effect of this is the charter market. If new boat sales slow, sometimes the charter fleets and rental markets benefit because people still want to experience yachting without the capital outlay. We could see charter companies snapping up some inventory, possibly even buying boats in Europe and keeping them in the Med or the Caribbean. Especially if certain boats can't be sold easily in the US, builders might strike deals with charter operators to take them instead. For sailors and boaters, this might mean more high-end charter boats available in vacation destinations. In summary, globally, we're seeing a bit of a market realignment. The coming year or two will show us how these shifts play out. Will American yards boom and foreign yards bust, or will everyone find a new equilibrium? Will tariffs get rolled back if the economy suffers, or will they become the new normal? It's a pivotal moment. Manufacturers are adjusting supply chains, maybe bringing up some production, and buyers are adjusting expectations. One more global point, currency exchange rates. Often in such trade disputes, currencies adjust. Recently, the US dollar has greatly declined in value compared to other currencies, which will make it even harder for Americans to buy foreign boats. So the price just went up on those boats because they're listed in euros. You can buy less euros now with your dollar, and now you have to pay a tariff. So the cost just went up even more. So what's the takeaway? In a nutshell, the new tariffs are rocking the boat, but the industry is adjusting tack. We went from a steady breeze of 1.5% duties to a norm of 10 to 50% or more. Everyone from buyers to builders is scrambling to adjust course. Buyers are rethinking plans, many looking domestically or to used boat markets to avoid paying a huge premium. Brands like Beneteau and Lagoon suddenly got a lot more expensive for Americans, and that's causing real shifts in behavior. European and Asian manufacturers are in turn hustling to find solutions, whether through US production, lobbying for chains, or offering incentives, or targeting other markets. Globally, we're seeing a new competitive landscape where countries not hit by extra tariffs like the UK or Turkey gain an edge in the US. And everyone is watching lead times and pricing adjustments like hawks. Looking ahead, a few things to watch: negotiations and policy changes. The situation is evolving. There's a chance these tariffs get reduced or lifted if trade negotiations succeed in the coming months. The 90-day suspension is a sign that it's a bargaining chip. If a deal is struck, we could see relief, which would likely unleash some pent-up demand. Imagine all the buyers waiting on the sidelines, jumping to get back in. Conversely, if things escalate, say the US doubles down or the EU retaliates even more, it could further fragment the market. So stay tuned to this podcast. You might need a part 2 in a few months. There's always going to be winners and losers in any kind of trade dispute or trade war. Like maybe a family-run boat yard in Florida getting new orders, and losers like a big European yard losing some orders to the US. But one thing is constant: people love boating, and those with the means will find a way to get out on the water one way or another. I hope this deep dive has helped demystify the situation and given you a clearer picture of how the global economics and politics can impact even our leisurely sailing dreams. It's a lot to digest, but knowledge is power. Or at least it helps us make smarter decisions, whether we're buying or selling or just watching the market. Thank you for watching, and I would really appreciate it if you would click that subscribe button. I'm really trying to make this channel a thing, and it helps me. It goes a long way. And also, it's available wherever you get your audio podcasts. You want to listen in the car, please do. So thank you guys, and I will catch you on the next podcast.